The Hope of Heaven. In January 2025, my father was hospitalized for yet another UTI. This one was brutal. He ended up being in the hospital for 10 days and then in rehab for 10 days after. When the hospital called me, they let me know there was a new symptom, dysphagia, which is an inability to swallow. It was yet another complication from Parkinson's. They told me my dad was not allowed to go back home to his independent living because of the dysphagia. There was a new doctor at the hospital, a urologist, and he put my dad on a medication called Macrobid. It's a daily antibiotic that's used to help decrease the frequency of the UTIs. Unfortunately, it has a side effect of destroying your kidneys, and my dad's kidneys were already in serious decline. It was clear the time had come to put him in an assisted living. He was increasingly falling due to the Parkinson's, and it wasn't safe for him to live at home alone anymore. On February 10th of this year, my dad went to live at the Gardens in Liberty Park in Streetsboro, Ohio. It's an assisted living, which was only 7 minutes away from where I stayed with my friend Lynn. On Valentine's Day, I was visiting my dad, and he told me that he never wanted to go to the hospital again. He said the next time he got a UTI, he didn't want to be treated. He wanted to be put on comfort care so he could die, go home, and be with the Lord. So we put him on hospice, waited for the next UTI to come. I flew back home to Texas for a few months to try to take care of my own health and my business. And I came back in the middle of May so that I could spend the summer with my papa. We both knew this would be his last summer. So we spent our time wisely. I visited him daily and took him out for car rides. I brought him over to the pool at Lynn's and he met a bunch of my friends. I took him out to enjoy his favorite foods while he could still swallow. We went to Dairy Queen to get ice cream, to Longhorn to get ribs, and we had car picnics outside of Chick-fil-A. Sometimes we just drove around his neighborhood or sat and held hands in silence on the couch. We had deep conversations about life and Jesus and forgiveness and heaven. The Macrobid kept the UTIs away for nearly 5 months, but signs of kidney failure were starting to appear. On July 18th, the doctor from the facility called me and let me know my dad was showing signs of a UTI. I spoke with my dad and reconfirmed he did not want to be treated. He wanted to go home to be with the Lord. So they took him off all his medicine that day, and we waited. On the following Wednesday, my dad called me crying. He said that hospice had come and told him he had a UTI and he was going home. I said I would be right there. On the 7-minute drive to his home, I called hospice and I asked them, why didn't you guys call me? And they said, we don't know what you're talking about. Nobody came to visit your dad. When I arrived at the Gardens, I asked the staff, who talked to my dad during lunch? They said, he told me that someone had told him he had a UTI and that he was dying. They assured me that no one talked to my dad during lunch. So I sat with my dad for the next couple hours and I asked him, well, what did the lady look like who came to visit you? He could describe her in detail, and he said she was so beautiful, beautiful. Together, we came to the conclusion that Jesus had sent a heavenly hospice worker to prepare him. He sat there for almost an hour straight, staring up at the crucifix that hung on the wall. And I asked him, what are you looking at, Papa? And he said, Jesus. We just sat there another couple of hours and held hands. Hospice did come and check on him, said his vitals were normal. So I assured my dad he did not actively have a UTI, and I left for work. 2 days later, on Friday, my Uncle Tom came to visit, and he asked my dad, have you been talking to Jesus? Did you ask him when he's coming to get you? And my dad said, yes, I have been talking to him. He said, wait a little longer. And my dad shrugged his shoulders and said, what are you going to do? A few hours later, my dad called me and said, can you come quick? My heart dropped because I knew I'd gotten this call dozens of times. The UTI was here. So I raced to the gardens and took one look at him and just knew this was the beginning of the end. His infection came on quick and hard. By 5 p.m. Friday, he was on comfort care. I stayed with him that whole night and held his hand. The next day on Saturday, his beloved caregiver, Angelica, came to visit him. I left them alone for a couple hours. When I came back in the room, my dad was fidgety and wanted to sit up. So the two of us helped him sit up on the edge of the bed. He wasn't really talking at that point, but he could hear us and he knew what was going on. He kept staring at the corner of the room. I was watching his face and wondering, what was he staring at? He pointed at the corner of the room and said, "Who's that?" I said, "I don't know. What do they look like?" He didn't answer. I asked him again, "What do they look like, Papa?" He still didn't answer. I asked him, "Are you afraid?" He smiled and said, "No, no." The look on his face was such awe and wonder. I will never forget it as long as I live. My father got a glimpse of heaven. From that point on, my father was no longer able to get up. The comfort care had kicked in and he was heading home. The rest of Saturday and Sunday, my friends and family came and spent time with him and said their goodbyes. His beloved friend Marcia spent an hour holding his hand and recounting the good times they had together. And on Monday evening at 9:05 p.m., my prayers were finally answered. My dad was no longer suffering. He had gone to be with the Lord. As heartbroken as we are when we lose someone we love, there is this joy for those of us who put our trust in Jesus because we know where we're going. And yes, we miss them, but we know that one day we will be reunited at the Lord's wedding supper. We will be singing praise to our King who ended our earthly suffering and brought us home to live in the house of the Lord forever. For those of us who put our trust in Jesus, there is always a hope of heaven.